Gosh, it's a fun story because so my brother and I would alternate having to do the dishes after dinner each night. And I don't remember how it came up, but I eventually was like, well, I wanted the CD player so I could listen to music while I was doing dishes and being bored doing that. And my dad had like the Time Life, like complete box set of like late 40s to early 60s, like classic music, like Smokey Robinson, Beach Boys, Elvis, Little Richard, who was my favorite, before I even knew who Bob was. Um, and so before I would go do dishes, I would go dig through my dad's CDs, and my dad had Street Legal, which is the only Dylan CD he had. Everything else he had was on vinyl. And I kept taking it out and looking at it. I was like, this is the guy that kind of has the weird voice, right? And I looked at the songs, like, I don't recognize any of these songs. I don't know, whatever. And I would keep putting it back. And then finally one time I was like, whatever, like listen to this other stuff, time to listen to the new stuff. And Changing of the Guards came on and just absolutely blew my mind. Like it was just the first time I'd heard a song like that told this just in-depth, mysterious story of whatever lands these characters were traveling through. And then I heard New Pony and hated it. So I put the CD away for a while, but then I said, no, I got to get back and see it. And then I listened to the rest of the CD. I'm like, this is amazing. And then my dad was like, well, I've got some other of his stuff. And he would take out one record at a time until he got tired of it. And then he would take out another Dylan record and say, okay, you need to stop playing this over and over again. Like even Self-Portrait, I would play on like repeat until, again, my dad got tired of it and would put on something else. But, and it was just this, I don't know, slow wade into Dylan's stuff album by album, and wearing out the needle on my dad's record player, and just thinking every time, this is going to be the album I don't like, or this is going to be the album I'm like, yeah, he can't possibly have another album that I really like, and being wrong every single time. Like, nope, I love this one too. My dad and Bob are close to the same age, so my dad was listening, which is crazy to think about, to these records as Dylan was releasing them. And I even heard a story from one of my dad's friends. When my dad passed away a few years ago, he was telling the story about how he and my dad would go back after school and listen to the new Bob Dylan, and that was either Freewheeling or his first album, and it was brand new for them. I remember my dad saying, I got Times Are Changing, and my dad came home from work and I was listening to it, and he was telling me, like, yeah, when this was coming out, like With God on Our Side, there's nothing like there's no song that was coming out was anywhere near stuff like this that was coming out. And so I don't think he was surprised. I think he really enjoyed it because I hadn't gotten into a lot of different music until that point. And so that was kind of a jumping off point for him to be like, oh, you like Dylan? Okay, here's all this Dylan stuff. Also, here's John Prine, here's Jackson Browne, here's all these other people that I really like. And then I got into that other music through him too. So I think some of it is my dad having not just the 60s stuff. Like the stuff that he introduced me first was not, I mean, I'd heard Rolling Stone on the radio, I'd heard Blown in the Wind a few times, but the first albums he gave my dad, loaned me, aside from Street Legal, Hard Rain, which was Rolling Thunder, New Morning, Self-Portrait, Desire, I think Slow Train was in there. And so by the time I had got to listening to more of the 60s, especially the 60s electric stuff, I had already had a wide, bunch of experiences to go off of. And also, I've always been the kind of person that doesn't like to follow the crowd. So, that same crowd of people that would have got mad at him for going electric, would have got mad at him for, going country western, going Christian, doing the Sinatra stuff. Like, it's like, well, Bob doesn't owe me anything. Like, he can play the music that he wants to, and either I'll enjoy it or I won't. And most of the time I will, like the vast majority of the time I will. And because you have that freedom there of not having to, you're not married to this, well, he's got to sound like Blonde on Blonde, or he's got to sound like Freewheeling, or he's got to sound like Blood on the Tracks. Then you realize, okay, well, no, he doesn't have to do that. So yeah, maybe I don't like his Sinatra stuff as much as pretty much everything else, but that's still him doing what he wants to do. And I don't have to like that stuff. I'll go listen to other stuff. And don't get caught up in the whole, I think that's a lot of the reason for the controversy, especially in Bob's early career, was that people had this expectation. I remember Bob saying that, I think one time Robbie Robertson said to him, like, well, where are you going to take it, man? And Bob's like, take what? And Robbie goes, well, the whole music scene. And Bob said he just rolled the window down and let that sentence go away. And Bob's like, I don't want it. Like, I don't want to take the whole music scene anywhere. I want to play the music that I'm going to play. And there's so many people that, have tied up this whole, legendary persona to say, well, he's got to go out and lead, some protests. He's got to go out and, say something profound. And I just don't see him that way. If he wants to do that, then he can do that. And we'll see what he says, or we'll see what he writes and whatever. But I'm not, I appreciate his talent. I appreciate his ability to write meaningful, powerful lyrics and music, and his talent on stage. And, having the freedom to say, well, he doesn't owe me anything. He can do what he wants. And maybe I don't like a particular performance, or maybe I don't like a particular song, but that doesn't mean that I can't absolutely love all his other stuff. Like, okay, well, I don't like if I would have stopped listening after New Pony, my life would be absolutely ridiculous. And, but now I go, okay, well, I just didn't like song number 2 on the CD that I really like pretty much everything else of. And probably one of 2 Dylan songs that I don't like, or whatever. But it's this, there's this freedom there that when you have that to look at all Bob's stuff and not really tie like his worth or your own worth with that, I think you have more freedom there to look at everything. It's kind of interesting because I've been listening to the albums and I had no concept of any live recordings existing outside actual, official releases or anything like that. And, didn't know the Dylan pool existed, didn't know any of this stuff happened. And so my uncle, I remember telling me, like, oh yeah, but Dylan's going to be in St. Paul, later this year in October. And I turned to my dad and go, oh, can we go? And I ended up going. And it hadn't even occurred to me, like, obviously I knew people toured and everything, but it hadn't even occurred to me that, oh, maybe someday Dylan will have a concert in town that I can go see, until my uncle mentioned it. And so I said, oh, we have to go. And it was a great show. And I even remember thinking as I left that, like, oh, this is good. Like, this is a good experience to have. And I wasn't really sure if I wanted to go to another one. I liked it and everything. Like, it wasn't like I was, oh, this is bad. But I was like, this might be, I might never do this again. And that'd be fine. This is a good experience. And then I started listening to more of his other live stuff and getting into more, his studio stuff, but also a lot of live recordings and everything. And that's what really put me over the top was, oh my gosh, this is the original version of Shelter from the Storm, and this is it live in Hard Rain, and this is it live at Budokan, and it's a completely different song. And then that really kind of pushed me over the top. And so I was listening to as much live stuff as I could, getting as many albums as I could, trying to find the obscure stuff that no one else really listened to. And so by the time he came to the area again the next year, then I was really hooked. I said, okay, well, anytime he's anywhere near me, that, that's where I'm going to go. And one thing led to another, as Bob is wont to do, where you're going to one concert, like, I have to, 20 songs, that's not enough. 25 songs, that's not enough. I need more. And I got to go the next night or follow him to a different city or whatever. And, at first, my first couple of shows, it was just, especially the first show I went to in St. Paul, 2002, it's like, well, I want to be up close. It's my first show. I want to be, as close as possible. And then once I got about probably my 3rd or 4th show, I realized, like, oh my gosh, like, you have to be like in the building with Bob is one thing and it's great, but if you really want the full experience, you should be up front where you can see Bob playing, where you can see him nodding, where you can see the band interacting with each other and, looking at each other for, guidance or cues or whatever. And, ever since like my 3rd or 4th show, so this would have been, I think, probably my 4th or 5th, I think fifth show in Milwaukee, was like, no, I need to be there early, I need to be up front, because, even from a financial standpoint, if I'm going to pay this money to go to a show, I want to enjoy it as much as possible. So I want to be up front and be as close as possible. So that was always, if I had a general admission seat, the whole day was picking up, because that's where I was going to be from noon, if not earlier. I really enjoy the uniqueness, not just of Bob, but in pretty much everything. Like if you know, it's why I don't like the Yankees, for example. Like I don't like to like the heavy favorites. I always like the underdogs. And when you hear Bob give a performance that he doesn't either has never, you know, given before or very rarely, it's just another level. And particularly Susie Baby at Midway Stadium, you know, this, I remember thinking earlier, because but it took Bob a while to take the stage, and
Yeah, I
usually
remember
Bob's
that.
pretty
Yep.
prompt. And I was kind of worried. I'm like, oh, Bob's, he's in his, you know, his early 70s. You know, it's not out of the realm of possibilities that something weird happened backstage, because he's taking a long time to get out here and it's not like him. And, you know, then they come out and everything. And then, of course, you find out later that he was talking with Bobby V, and the band was probably rehearsing the song and everything in the back. And, but it's just so magical, that moment. I think that's my favorite Dylan moment of all time, being there, because you think, here's a song that Bob played piano for somebody else and then never played himself until this moment. And you get to see that this song that has such a important part in Bob's musical career. And then there's stuff like the duet with Willie Nelson, Heartland. That was really great. I didn't know it at the time, but the first show I went to with all the covers with Mutineer from Zevon, Old Man, and End of the Innocents, Brown Sugar. You know, I'm just getting into it. So I don't know how rare that is that he covers, you know, even one song a night. And now he covers 4. And it's, I still remember Mutineer being just magical. And even the last go around that I saw him before the pandemic was really memorable, in that he had the band, you know, kind of a new lineup, and he just had this new energy, and where it's like, I wanted to, you know, he wasn't shaking up the set list that much, but I wanted to go every show, because every show had that different new energy. And just to see the way he interacts with fans too, even though you might not think it, because he doesn't talk really, he doesn't really look at them that much, but you can tell when they're energetic, he's energetic. I'm not as much of I like reading about Bob, I like reading like chronicles and everything, but I do think that when you have someone with a vast catalog like Bob, there's so much out there that doesn't actually reflect what he wanted to write in the first place. So sometimes it's hard with so many books out there to really say, well, I'm going to read this guy's take on it, or I'm going to read this person's take on it, or what is, you know. And so I kind of try to stay away from that, just because it irritates me when people are like, oh, Bob meant this. It's like those famous interviews back in the 60s where they're like, oh, what's the meaning of the motorcycle on your shirt? And Bob's like, well, I was just wearing my Triumph motorcycle shirt. It doesn't have any meaning. And so that's where I tend to think. But front row, you can't experience much things, or you can't experience many things on this planet better than a Dylan show in the front couple rows, because you have a guy, you know, even in his 60s and 70s, which is when I started watching him live, just at the master level of his craft, and how he can work the stage without even doing anything almost. And it's just the professionalism, the truth and the beauty of his songs, what he says, you know, now, and being able to interact with that on a level where you're right there, just feet from him. And, you know, you're experiencing history every time, you know, regardless of how many times you've seen him. Yeah, so I grew up playing, I wanted, when I was in, I think, kindergarten or second grade or something like that, I told my parents, I said, I want to learn how to play every instrument. And they said, well, let's let's bring that back a little bit and start with piano and see what happens from there. So I started piano at second grade, and I played piano for a while, and I never really got into it. Like really, I mean, it was enjoyable, but not really something that I was really keen about until I got introduced to Dylan's music. And then my piano teacher was able to bring out, you know, some other music from other artists that related to Bob. And then I said, well, I want to play guitar now. And then I taught myself guitar and harmonica, and kind of the standard Bob Dylan starter pack as far as instruments go. But, you know, listening to Bob's music and hearing the stuff that he had written was what really like made me want to get into like actually playing music, writing music, just playing other people's songs, and, you know, perform for other people. Like I still get this itch, which has been tough with the pandemic, to, you know, find an excuse to get a bunch of people together in a band and, you know, play on stage. And do that. And we did, I think the last concert, I got a group of guys together. We played the full version of Lily Rosemary and the Jack of Hearts, which was super fun. And everyone always gives me the eye roll when I'm picking songs, because they know I'm always going to pick like a 10 to 15 minute long Dylan song. I remember when back in college, we did Christmas caroling at an assisted living place up here. And my friend Kevin, who I went to high school with, so he knew about, getting into Dylan and everything. He goes, "Oh my gosh, Jesse, you sing Christmas carols like Bob Dylan would." And I didn't even realize that I was doing it, but I was just using whatever phrasing I was copying. And I said, "Oh, well, that's interesting." But yeah, both in the way he, but before Bob started moving his keyboard like to the side of the stage, I would always have the keyboard to the center if I was singing and playing, and then I moved it to the side facing the band like Bob did. And I was like, this is like, why didn't I think of this sooner? This is a lot, it's a lot easier to play and interact with the band you're playing with when you're not, turning around like you would have to. I mean, you're holding a guitar and that's easy with a guitar, but not with the piano. But as far as the phrasing goes, learning, I don't even know if learning is right, absorbing the phrasing that Bob uses in his live performances through the years is just, it's just a little fun thing to do. And it's just something that was just incorporated almost automatically into what I was doing, different, ways to, growl into the mic or, bend the words around your vocal cords like Bob does. It's super fun to think, oh, I did it that way. Bob would probably sing the song that way, but in a little different way. So, and of course people don't listen to Bob live like I do, so they don't know that that's where it's coming from, but it's fun anyway. It doesn't go away. It sometimes doesn't cross your mind as much because you're used to driving in the same places. But yesterday I was stopping for lunch down on London Road and drove past the Armory where Bob saw Buddy Holly play. And I work a few blocks from Bob's house that he grew up in Duluth. So sometimes you have to stop and remember, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm in this place that's so packed full of Dylan history. But when you do stop and remember that, it feels really neat to just be so close to these essential parts of Bob's life. It's really surreal because, in a sense, you walk into Electric Fetus downtown. It's a local record shop that they have up here. And you go into the local music section and there's Dylan. It's a surreal feeling. And so you have all these people where they're coming from all over the world to, see where Bob grew up or interact with things related to Bob. And one of my friends from the Dylan pool, he actually had a road trip in the United States. This is the year we went up to Dylan Days, and he sent an email to folks on the Dylan pool and said, "Hey, I'm going to be in Minnesota. What do I want to see? How do I get up to Hibbing?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, just ride with me. I'm driving from the cities up to Hibbing for Dylan Days too." And so it's great to have this guy from Germany, taking basically a summer out of his life to go around the US and to really take this time and say, well, I'm a huge Dylan fan. And so we enjoyed our road trip up to Hibbing. We stopped at a park that had a water pump. And so we did our Vandals Broke the Handles pose in front of that. And it's fun being able to have people that are as passionate about it to talk to, because the people that I usually end up with outside Bob shows waiting for hours for the general admission seats to open are the people that are really into them. And it's really refreshing. It's like, I think about Chimes of Freedom, where Bob talks about a place to bring your thoughts. And I think about that a lot with different aspects of my life, but like, hey, I can talk to you guys in a different way than I talk to even my best friends, because they don't quite get. I told my friends only Bob Dylan would reach #1 for the first time with a 16-minute song about the JFK assassination in the middle of a pandemic. Like there's no one else could do that. And I listened to the songs kind of one by one, the early ones that they were released, and I went up and got it and got the album when it came out. And I went home after work, shut the door, plugged in the music system that I hadn't used in years, because I usually have a different one I listen to, and with some incense and just like listen, because it was just like this. It just felt like in this moment in time, there's this pandemic. Actually, I don't think I even got home from work. I don't think I was working at the time. I think it was on furlough, but it's like everyone's kind of on their own. Everyone's, isolating and staying at home. I was also recovering. I had had surgery that I had barely gotten into before everything shut down. So it kind of timed itself out. But so I wasn't able to do a lot of walking, a lot of, stuff outside, even on my own. So I was in my room and just listening to this. And that was the first time I'd ever, I mean, whenever a Dylan CD comes out, I would bring home and listen to it right away. But this is the first time that it was like listening to it in isolation. The people I live with are off doing their thing. They're in their rooms. I have my door closed. And it was a really surreal experience listening to it, because you're listening to these stories come one after another. And, after a few years of the Sinatra standards, you can be like, well, he's still doing this. He's still writing these same brilliant songs. And I can still see, music videos playing in my head that don't exist, of like My Own Version of You, or, I made my mind up to give myself to you, and stuff like how Key West is another one that, when I listened to Key West, it was like I wasn't in snowy northern isolated Minnesota anymore. I was in Florida, watching a sunset on the beach. And it was like, this guy is still amazingly relevant, amazingly skilled at what he's doing, and just knows how to immerse you in these different stories and songs. And there's no one else like it, that no one else can do that as consistently and as well as he does. And I've always been, I remember growing up as a kid watching old B monster black and white movies, and it's like Frankenstein, or like stupid stuff like The Crawling Eye or whatever. And so I've always kind of liked that scientist trope. And when Bob, sings My Own Version of You, he's essentially, marrying that like Frankenstein type story with something else. And you're not even quite sure what it is. Like, okay, did he lose someone that he loved? Is this like, is he just kind of a creepy guy? Like, there's something else happening here, that it's not just Dr. Frankenstein. Like and there's something sinister going on that you want to know. Like, I'll meet you on Armageddon Street. Okay, what who lives on Armageddon Street? Who exists on Armageddon Street? And it's these atmospheres and these landscapes that Bob pulls you into, like Desolation Row or Visions of Johanna. And that's what it felt like. It felt like I was just pulled in to this story and trying to figure out what's going on. It was very similar to Changing of the Guards, where you have a story and it's not clear. Like, you can't put your finger on exactly what it is, and so you want to listen and you want to try to figure it out, and you're like, oh, what is this happening here? Simple Twist of Fate is kind of like that too, but in a less, I think people don't realize that as much because it's more of a simple song. But yeah, no, when I heard My Own Version of You, it's just like, wow, this is great. Like, I was already trying to figure out, like, oh, what if I were to make a music video of this, and lightning and whatever. But yeah, it's just captured my imagination a lot. I think we're all, as humans, drawn to things that are true and things that are beautiful. And when you have someone like Bob that really understands that, like really gets, whether it's a long story song or even a short, like basic, like 3-verse, 3-chord, folk song that really resonates with someone, you don't have to be a literal hobo that, is chasing down boxcars and everything, but you understand that as, traveling from place to place, or maybe through some struggles of your own life. And so there's something true there that's at the bottom of everything, pretty much everything that Bob writes, where I can identify with this, whether it's financial situations or, love and loss. And he doesn't mince words. I think it was George Harrison that said, if there were some things that Bob said that no one would have said if he hadn't. Mm-hmm. And that was like, there's not many people you can say that about, but Bob is definitely one of those, where it's, I'm a huge fan of C.S. Lewis too. And he has this quote about, like, when you become friends with someone, he says, it's basically, so you saying to someone else, oh, you too? I thought I was the only one, and so you're like, oh, here's a spirit that understands what I'm going through in some sense or another. And I think Bob does that with a lot of people. And I think that's why he's gotten so legendary. I can say that, my life is completely different because I've listened to his music, and that sounds really generic. But to be more specific is that, when I encountered his music in high school, it was like new worlds were opening up. It was, and some of that was from how I grew up. Like I grew up listening and watching my dad's old movies, listening to my dad's music. Like there's still some like classic like 90s movies that I haven't seen because I just never watched them growing up because that wasn't what we did. If we went, Friday nights, if we had, free time as a family, we watched old, black and white murder mysteries or monster movies, stuff like that. We didn't watch, the Goonies or Lord of the Rings or just stuff like that. And same thing with music. And so I was in high school and all I knew is my dad's stuff. And then there was this crappy rap crap that I had no interest in learning. I'm like, oh, what happened to music? It didn't, it must be awful. There's no good music at all. And then I listened to Dylan. And then from Dylan, I would listen to, like just a really concrete example of, my mom goes one day, she goes, oh, Roseanne Cash is playing at the zoo. And I'd gone to a couple concerts at the Minnesota Zoo, and only because I liked Dylan, and then I liked Johnny Cash from there. And so Roseanne Cash is Johnny's daughter. So, and Josh Ritter was opening for Roseanne Cash. So and Josh Ritter is probably my favorite, modern, if you want to call it that, singer-songwriter. And I've seen Josh, I think 2 or 3 times in concert too. And one of the gals I dated in high school, like one of Josh's songs was our song, like that was what we danced to. And then we went to a concert together, and he opened with that song. And so it's like there's just all these different branches. It's like a tree with roots, Bob might say, but like where Bob started them, and I wouldn't even have those if I hadn't listened to his music or listened to like what he said. Even the different things that he does now, like, oh, he makes whiskey. Oh, that's cool. Oh, he does metal work. You realize that you don't have to be, I mean, I'm sure it helps to have the money that he has, but you don't have to be restricted to, what do you want to do? Well, I want to be, a coach or a musician or a writer or whatever. It's like, you can, if you are interested in something, just go pursue it and see what happens. And I think that, here's someone who everyone knows is talented in the musical realm. And all of a sudden he's doing all this, he had a stage musical that's based on his stuff. He's, like I said, the whiskey and the metal work and the paintings. And you realize that, well, if you're a creator, you can create, and you don't have to worry about, and I think this is what Bob gives you, create, and you don't have to worry about what people think about what you're creating, because you get to decide that. And you have someone in Dylan probably who had to deal with expectations in popular culture like no one else in history. And when are you going to protest? When are you going to write an next protest song? When are you going to do this? And for him to be able to stand in that storm and say, no, I'm going to go record country songs with Johnny Cash now. And, say in Chronicles, like, well, I made a bad album on purpose. I threw everything at the wall to see what would stick and just to see what people would do. And just stuff like that made me able to look at my life and say, okay, I'm going to do this. And I don't care if no one likes it. Like, I created it, or I talked to someone about this subject, or I watch this movie, and I don't care if people like it or not, because that doesn't give me my value, and that doesn't really impact my life, really, what people think about what I'm doing. And most of the time, you realize, like, how many people, haven't followed the standard road that we're supposed to go on. And most of the time, those people end up doing really good things. And so I think that Bob was the first person that I really realized that with, was you don't have to be typical. You don't have to be average. You don't have to follow along with what everybody thinks. You just see where your passion takes you and see where your creative talent takes you, and then go from there.